All right. I think we're live. Jessica, welcome. Welcome everybody
Oh,
who has come and joined today. So the way this works is we're doing a simu-live where we've pre-recorded this presentation on purpose. And so we're going to play that. It's about 23 minutes. And during that time, Jessica and I are here to answer questions. So this entire thing can be a workshop, and then we're going to pause after that and then do an actual workshop. So there are some folks I know who have come with questions about their brand, about their messaging, about running into internal approvals. And so there will be time later to get into that. And you can share anything you like there. You can say you're asking on behalf of a friend. We won't be publishing this live afterwards. And so with that, Jessica, anything you would add before we begin?
no, I'm just excited. I think this is a really of the moment topic, and I think a lot of people are talking about it. So hopefully, everybody who has joined us has come with lots of questions because we're here to answer them.
All right, we'll be in the chat. All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the messaging workshop, Why Creative Risk Takers Win. We're going to pause for just a moment here. And if everyone would, please tell us in the chat, what is a campaign or a brand that you have a crush on? What is something you have seen recently where you thought, wow, that's really clever or creative? And so with that, let's get into it. So whatever you thought of, whatever you posted, the question we would pose is, did you like it because it is the same as everything you tend to see out there, or because it is different? It ends up you're probably a pretty good proxy for B2B buyers. Like, they enter buying cycles, we know from a lot of research, including from 6sense, with a lot of fixed ideas. They come in with a list of 4 vendors. They already have that list ranked, and they tend to buy from the first one that they contact. Jessica, anything you would add to this idea?
Yeah, I mean, what it really means is that marketers need to make sure that they're grabbing the attention of your prospect. It's not sales' job anymore. It's definitely solidly in marketing's hands. And so you've got to have something special that is going to get your prospect to pay attention and listen to you.
Yeah. So given that, it's sort of shocking how much, in my mind, I see everything starting to converge on sameness. We're actually seeing this in a lot of places in society, but you can see here by the color of cars over time, things are turning white and gray and colorless. You see this with logos. For some reason, there's a trend about having everyone's logo becoming the same blocky lockup, which in a squint test, if you squint, they become increasingly difficult to tell apart. And we're seeing this all across society. If you look at colors generally all throughout, everything seems to be converging again on this sort of beige color. That becomes a problem in marketing when your message gets thrown up alongside everyone else's messages, and it's hard to tell them apart. So we'll pose the question here: can anyone tell who these messages belong to? And these are all companies all of you know of. And that's the great challenge. This is increasingly what is happening. Is we don't get to control the channel as much anymore. People are not going to your website to do that initial research. They are doing it in an LLM, which disintermediates all of the brand and the design into a text. And if your text looks like this next to everyone else's text, it's pretty hard to stand out and be memorable and build trust. Similarly, we're seeing this with logos or the monogram logo symbols before everyone's logo. Like, for some reason, all the AI ones look the same. We've got a lot of A's in the marketing software world. And so we're going to explore that in today's webinar. And we'll start off by introducing ourselves. Jessica, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jessica Fewless. I'm the head of marketing at Inverta, B2B growth marketing agency. I have been in the B2B space for almost 30 years at this point, a lot of tech in my background. And one thing that has me interested in having this conversation today is that back in 2000 was my first job in tech. And I worked for a company called Latitude Communications. I'm guessing nobody on this call knows who Latitude Communications is. We were one of the very first voice and web conferencing solutions. Who came up at the exact same time was WebEx, which I'm guessing is a name that everybody recognizes. And it was because they were different. We were kind of your standard corporate, we were a corporate tool. We just, played by corporate rules. And in comes WebEx with RuPaul, pitching their stuff. And now, was RuPaul controversial? Absolutely, because not everybody in the world was into alternative lifestyles. And it was like, wait, what is this? Oh, we're gonna offend the Midwest, right? We're gonna offend the South. And WebEx didn't care. And you know what? They won, regardless of who they may or may not have offended, because they stood out and everybody knew who WebEx was. Was their product any better than ours? No, but they won out long term because they stood out in the marketplace. And so that's my vested interest in having this conversation today with Chris, is to get more people to think about standing out and taking some risks to give your brand that advantage.
Yeah, we want to be interested. I think that's a great it's a great point. Like this can be interesting. We should be interested in the work that we're doing. We should be interested in each other's work, and that should definitely come through. My part of this is I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fenwick. I started my career at Marketo, and I started as a salesperson on calls with marketers whose top objection was, we don't have enough content. And I always thought that was just such a strange term, as if content was something that you went to a warehouse and pulled out of a bin and put in a shopping cart. And my feeling and question always was like, but who are you? What is that you are trying to say? What is true about you that you want to communicate? And I feel like a lot of that doesn't get explored in the B2B space. And it is not because B2B is inherently boring. I hear that B2B isn't sexy line over and over, and everything is interesting to someone who is an expert at it. And our audiences are experts, and they want us to feel as interested in the stories that we are telling, I believe, as we want to be. And so my interest here is giving those who are watching some tools with which to fight the fight internally to be differentiated, because you may be entering this with all of the same beliefs as us, but how do you activate it when you're in a large structure and there's a lot of internal selling that has to happen to get others to believe that taking a creative risk is actually a good idea? And so with that, where were we? Fitting in is really bad for business. Jessica, you talk about this all the time, but like, what is a marketer's primary job? It's to build trust.
Mm-hmm. And if nobody sees your content, you can't build trust with them.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like you need to get noticed. So it's like, be on the list and be memorable so that they know you're on the list.
Exactly.
Standing out is really, really good. This won a Cannes Award this year. It's a B2B campaign, right? GoDaddy sells websites, and it's just strange and irreverent, right? Like nobody's data analysis would have led them to think that a pun about using an actor whose name is Walter Goggins launching a goggle brand so that they can play around with Walter Goggins goggle glasses would have been a good idea. And it's super, super silly, and it's well acted and it's well produced. And they really did have him launch these. And I see people walking around San Francisco wearing them. And this isn't a product that existed prior. It wasn't a real ambition of his. It was a creative campaign. It was a bunch of people sitting around in a room making each other laugh. And then it got out and it worked. And it's really, really helped their brand. This is not easy to do, right? This was done by an outside creative studio. So Jessica, I'd love to hear from you, like typical creative process to get to something like this that is actually going to stand out and be different and unique and take a risk. Like, what is it that you see process-wise in large B2B marketing organizations that prevents this kind of creativity from maybe making it out into the world?
Brand guidelines. Those are the downfall of every creative concept on the planet, right? The bigger the company, the more strictly people have to adhere to brand guidelines, and you must use these colors and you must have this tone of voice and blah, blah, blah. And when you have a creative team or you have a campaigns team internal to your organization, they feel handcuffed to those brand guidelines, and they cannot diverge from that. And so that just is a creativity killer. And so when it gets to quote unquote creative, it is creative within the box of your brand guidelines, which means it's not creative at all. Right. And so, this typical process here is, the company has, its goals and objectives for the year, and then the CMO has to match what they're going to do to that. And once again, it's just numbers, right? And then we're like, how many campaigns do we need to do to achieve the goals that the company needs from us? Numbers, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how are we going to staff it? How are we going to budget it? Once again, numbers. And now we go, great. Okay, we have a campaign that we've decided is going to be on this topic, and it needs to drive this many pipeline opportunities. Go be creative. No, right? No,
Yeah.
nobody's going to be creative at that point, because so much of the room for that has been stripped out at this point that it's like, great, okay, well, we need to drive, 100 pipeline opportunities, and we're going to do what we typically do. And we're going to use all the same channels we always do. And we're going to use the blue and orange and white that is in our color palette. And we're going to write a white paper, and we're going to put it out through email and on LinkedIn ads and display advertising and hope for the best.
Yep.
That's what happens in your typical campaign workflow.
Yeah. It makes me think of the old joke about the pirate morale issue. They say the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Right.
And there's
Yeah.
so much pressure misapplied with a lack of understanding of how do those creative things actually come together.
Right.
I think of a very large Fortune 10 enterprise that we have worked together on recently, where we came in and the initial brief is so tightly constrained, and they have waited until the very last minute to involve creatives. And the least value that a creative director and their team can bring is moving words about on a page, right? It's like there's so little you can achieve, because the real substance and the meaning and the things that would get people outside to actually have a visceral reaction to this start way before. And Fenwick has a couple of principles, and one of them that I think is fairly controversial when we bring it into enterprise situations is no creative by committee. I think that machines produce what they are designed to produce, and a lot of companies don't realize that they actually have an anti-creativity machine, that it is designed to your point, stick to the brand guidelines. And if this is all a silent movie and you ask, was that machine designed to produce, like, it tends to produce consensus at the cost of creativity. You have a lot of people who may not actually even understand the creative process, who are reviewing copy and reviewing ideas, not from the understanding that we are trying to affect a feeling in our buyer, but they're thinking in their head, this doesn't sound how I would say it. And then you get 24 people throughout a process all saying, this doesn't quite sound how I would say it. And you wind up with something that is the most agreeable to everybody and absolutely generic and boring and uninteresting, right? Like
Well,
all edges have been sanded off of it by
yeah,
the
I mean, we're not here to talk about campaign planning process, but that is an inherent flaw in the way most organizations plan their campaigns, because it's not clear who's responsible for what. I am a self-admitted allergic to process. I absolutely am. I always have been. But, when you're thinking about the campaign planning process, creating a RACI or a structure that says who's responsible for what, who's accountable, who can have input, right? Versus who's just informed is so important, because otherwise what happens is, and I had a client like this, and this was when they hit their breaking point, when there was a trade show coming up, and the campaign manager had a meeting to review the trade show landing page. And it wasn't even their trade show, it was their presence at that trade show. 20 people showed up to that meeting.
Yeah.
20 people. And they were like, absolutely not, we can't have this anymore.
Yeah.
And that is also part of what you're talking about, Chris. It's like, there should not be 20 people on that call. There should be one. They may have gotten input along the way, but there should be one person who ultimately decides what the copy is on that webpage.
That's exactly it. It's one creative owner, so that there's a singular vision and they can incorporate everyone else's ideas, but ultimately they have to decide. Otherwise, it's not going to be coherent, because and again, I joke about the machine, but it's like no one's stepping back to ask, what is this machine wired to produce? And if you were to rewire it from consensus to creativity, yeah, there'd be a lot less people involved. Like I think about some of the startups we work with where there is definitely no creative process already in place. And people are actually thrilled to be asked to stop reviewing things, right? We had one CEO who was proofreading everything we did, and we asked him to
Right.
stop. I said, oh, thank God. That was exhausting. Please, not necessary. Fewer people is going to produce something that is more directive, and sometimes too really useful to just get it out there too, right? I see this all the time. You have that group of 24 join Zoom, they all have their cameras off, and the question is, what do buyers really think? And no one has talked to a buyer in too long. And you can resolve all of this by doing what we call a spark test, where you just send those creative concepts in a text to people that you know who are like those buyers or close enough, and get a reaction. Be like, hey, I didn't create this, right? Because when you say you created it, they're not going to be honest. You say, I didn't make this. Someone on my team made this. Is there anything here? And you get some really candid responses. And that little spark test can do so much more value than months of checking in with stakeholders and everyone cosplaying a customer.
Yep.
So what can you do specifically, right? We talked about a couple of things here. One of those things is to go offline. So I share these just as an example of if you were trying to build a system that achieved the kind of creativity that some of the best agencies achieve. Collins does some fantastic work, and they have a requirement that you have to start offline. You cannot start on a computer with your research. You got to start out in the world. There's an amazing brand studio called So-and-so that did Fenwick's recent rebrand, and they start all of their logo work with pen and ink, and they require that. Ogilvy similarly has libraries in every office where you are encouraged to, instead of starting your campaign on the computer and going to Dribbble and LinkedIn and places where everything is just a copy of a copy, and go back to source literature and architecture books and history. If you were to start to take some of that creative process and put it back in, it would look like this: much smaller committee, singular person deciding, and you would have those creatives at the very start. Because again, the question is, how do we put a campaign out of the world that people react to and love and have a really good time engaging with? And in my experience, the most helpful we can be is inserted early on to bring that customer perspective. We can be an advocate for the customer because the creatives on the team, and especially like an outside studio, are out there having these experiences, seeing things, noticing stuff that people inside the company may be just way too busy to think about or engage with.
Well, and not only, and then not only is it, a creative concept in and of itself, and it's going to be more engaging and those sorts of things, but everybody inside your organization gets pumped up about it when it's creative, right? Instead of just like, oh, it's another standard day at the office, I'm posting my ads on LinkedIn and I'm, doing this and I'm doing that. People get excited, and then it just snowballs, right? Because if the creative concept gets everybody fired up and gets everybody inspired, people are like, and we could, right? And so it just starts to explode. And sometimes you might have to rein that back in a little bit, but that's okay. You'd rather have that than once again have everybody be uninspired and go, well, we'll just do what we always do.
Yep.
Because you're going to get the same as you always get.
Exactly. So Jessica, how did this start?
Yeah. Well, and so I think we modeled what you just showed on the last slide here, right? Because one of our corporate objectives, Inverta's been in business for over a decade. And when we first came on the scene was with the rise of account-based marketing. So we were known, although not exclusively but we were known as one of the leaders in account-based marketing because we were first to market with the core principles and helping our clients actually succeed with it. Well, over time, a lot more players have come into the marketplace, right? So there's a lot more moneyness on who knows ABM. And so one of our corporate objectives last year was to recapture our leadership on ABM, right? That was our corporate objective. Now, we started to go down the path of writing yet another white paper, but we were documenting, okay, what are the things, how are we going to do this? And our concept was, okay, what are the things that people typically trip up with around ABM that cause it to fail or cause it to not quite produce what you think it's going to produce, right? And at that point is when I engaged with Chris and Fenwick and said, here's our goal. We want to recapture our thought leadership in ABM. We've identified these kind of 7 things that typically cause ABM to go wrong. Should we just write another white paper? And Chris said, hold my beer. Let us think on this a little bit and we'll come back to you. And so to his point about a spark test, he came back with a mood board after he did some spark testing on his own, right? And came back with a mood board and said, what do you think? Right. And thus was born Who Killed ABM. It wasn't just, here's a white paper of the 7 things people typically get wrong, but we turned it into saboteurs and intrigue, and also fired people up because they're like, wait a second, ABM's not dead. And we're like,
there's a lot of kickback on that, which is exactly the kind of reaction you want, right? You need a disputable concept.
We had people who were like violently opposed, like, no, ABM's not dead. What are you talking about? And it was like, okay, stick with us. It was clear by the time we got to October, just kidding, ABM faked her death because everybody was doing it wrong, right? And that,
which is classic murder mystery, right? It's like the show goes on no matter what. Part of what I think makes this work so well too is like credit goes to the Fenwick team that this is also just us having fun too, right? And asking what would entertain us and thinking about marketers. And it ends up, a lot of marketers we talk to are into murder mysteries. And Karina has read so much Agatha Christie that she can just stream of consciousness recreate some of the tropes from that. So this is both the same content. It is richly useful and full of real examples and education wrapped in entertainment with these beautiful graphics by Clarissa and Amanda, with some mid-journey prompting to create recurring characters that carry throughout the series.
Yeah. And every chapter I read had me giggling inside, right? Like, and that was a good sign. I'm like, okay, if I'm laughing, like if I get this, like if I'm intrigued by this, so is our audience going to be.
Yeah. And credit to the whole Inverter team. People had questions about it and how are we going to measure this and how's it going to perform, but they let it out in the world and it got to do its thing.
Yep.
So, more creative concepts. I will talk about these very briefly. We had a campaign with this digital asset management company, not an exciting space necessarily, but we asked how can they, instead of running just a campaign about new features they've launched, which are very exciting, but almost too good to be true, what do we do? And so we created a campaign about the CMO who knows all, who is so all-knowing that when she A/B tests, both variants win, and made it about memes and puns. And that has achieved more than it would have if they had just written a bunch of blog posts about what that new product does. With Eventique, they are an elite event production company. And instead of just publishing about what they do, we wanted to give people a feeling of it. And so we created this online masterclass for them. For Bessemer Venture Partners, they had an insight that all the founders that they were working with weren't just struggling with what idea to start with a startup, but they were struggling physically with starting a startup, right? These super long hours and not taking care of your body takes a toll and makes you less mentally acute and actually is a risk for your investors. So they created a physical exercise regimen and had us create an online course to pair with that teaches founders about nutrition and exercise and the importance of treating yourself like an endurance athlete. How does this come about? It's actually not that complicated if you have a creative team who knows how to run this, which is just to create a pitch process. So like, here's the Eventique course. At the very beginning, we pitch 8 different ideas that this could be, and we give it to the client for them to react to, right? Because they know their business best. And so they will say, oh, yes, this, not really, that wouldn't work because of this. We had a creative on our team, Sarang, come up with this beautiful night school concept and then pulled it all through. These are simple stages. It does not require a lot of people approving this as they go. And by the time you have that initial pitch, you can do a spark test. And reactions from people were, they would love this and they want to know when it's live. So with that, we're now going to switch over into doing a workshop. Okay. Workshop time. Yes. So now is the moment. Like, we've shared a number of examples here. I think, one thing I'll reiterate before we get into answering people's questions is just that good creative campaign should solve a problem. And that's really the rubric that you should hold it against. It's not just that it's creative. It's not just that you want top of funnel awareness. ideally you're approaching this from the problem statement perspective of this part of our funnel is not working. We have this corporate objective. We need to achieve this, but we don't have a lot of resources. And so a really good creative concept is a solution. It's a fix to that, which is why a creative team can pitch 3 to 4 ideas, and then you judge which of these ideas is most likely to get people super excited. Taylor, very excited to see you here and in the chat talking about that. Taylor was behind the approver and helped create the Tenevis CMO Who Knows All campaign. And that was fun. It was fun the entire way through. It was fun from the pitch. And then, going back to that page and seeing that you folks have just continued to write more memes is very exciting, because that's a campaign that has legs and can carry on. And that's exactly what we want. We want stuff that lives on, that people actually want to react to. So what brand messaging questions do people have? Taylor, I see you've got one here, and I'll read it to everyone. How should you manage any response saying that what you're doing is controversial, i.e., they interpret the campaign wrong or have negative commentary? Jessica, I feel like you're a great one to answer that.
Yeah. I think a little bit of your comment there kind of says us all. It's like, good. Like it's causing people to think, when I proposed the Who Killed ABM, I expected a lot of pushback, because it was very different for us. I mean, we're kind of a, while we're small and scrappy and fun agency, at the same time, we've always been pretty buttoned up in our approach. And so the Who Killed ABM was like a left at Albuquerque for us, right? Obviously, Chris still maintained the core of who Inverta was with it, but it was very different, and it was going to cause some controversy in the marketplace. We knew it. And so there was the conversations around, is it worth the risk? Right. And, some of it was data-based. I was like, look, when we put a piece of content out there, we get 150 downloads, right? This is going to be a campaign that is going to last, I think the total duration was 8 weeks. Right. And it was constantly going to be bringing people back for a new chapter. We were releasing it chapter by chapter. Right. And so we were okay with, if people wanted to spark a conversation and say, but ABM's not dead, is where we came down to it. Cause we were like, okay, we're going to get that much more exposure. It's something that could potentially go viral-esque, whatever the definition of viral is, but something, in my opinion, it was when people would share it with other people and say, this is clever. So maybe they're not even caring about the actual content itself, but going, this is clever, right? Because the Inverta logo was on everything, right? So now we're actually building awareness of Inverta, whether they care about the content or not. And that, when we kind of thought about the checks and balances, that to us became the driving factor, that it was, yeah, let's go for it. So,
yeah, I'd add on to that too. It also really depends on the tenor of those responses too, right? Because if it is pure confusion, I think that's really good feedback, and that's something we would always want to try to figure out in the Spark test phase. Is like, does this make sense? Because I feel very inspired from reading about UX design and the desire to understand how people are interacting with things when you're not there to guide them. I think a lot of marketers' first impulse when they get that negative feedback is to explain why it is the way that it is, but you're not going to be there to explain it when it's out there on its own. So if people consistently do not get it, even if it is absolutely maddeningly confusing that they don't get it, that's maybe input to take in. I think about, we're working with a CRM company right now, and their H1 on their website says CRM. And when we just did a walkthrough with some senior buyers of the website, the senior buyer's top question was, but is it a CRM? And you would not have thought that we would have had to explain that, but it didn't quite. And so there's definitely something there to explore if there is confusion. But if people disagree, that's great. That's really good, especially in conversations on LinkedIn or on social media, because good ideas, I think, are disputable. I think a lot of times marketers maybe want to put things out there that are safe and undisputable. Um, and it's just, I don't know, that doesn't advance the conversation. It doesn't give people something genuine to react to. Like, I would be really excited about a message where 50% of people disagree, and then respond to every one of those comments and be like, interesting, what's your take on that? Like, that to me, there's a lot of value.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So follow-on question to that is, this campaign has legs comment, knowing that our creative campaign lands hard and well with the right people, how do you reach even more of them, especially with pricey LinkedIn ads these days? Yeah, that's tough. It's tough, right? Yeah, Jessica, I'd love to hear your take on it, but you know, how do you reach more of them? Like, the hope is that you're creating things that consistently get noticed and get shared in places that are not public, right? Like, I think that we all know at this point that dark social is probably way larger than public social. People are only going to post a narrow set of things on LinkedIn, which is why some creative campaigns like just can't really spread publicly because people don't want to talk about it. Like, one of the first ones that we did for a mobile device management company was making light of the fact that the sales and compliance teams at big banks really hate each other. Like, when you interview either of them and both have to use the same software platform, all they want to talk about is how compliance is ruining sales's world or how sales is ruining compliance's world. And so we created a microsite that allowed them to jab at each other in a way. We had these competing interviews where you'd scroll down and one side would be compliance complaining about sales, and then back, and it like really engaged people. And no one was willing to share that, because you're just going to look silly, right? Because you don't want that to be out in the public. So I think that it's a real art to trying to figure out what kind of creative campaign can actually spread.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, maybe figuring out what's the second act on top of that. So Who Killed ABM had something of a second act on top of it, right? Like, people want to know, where do we go from here? And the initial version of it was, I'm using Who Killed ABM. There's so many examples, but like, that one's a good one because it was episodic for 8 weeks that took people through a journey that was like fairly involved. Like, it was a lot of reading to that. It's really good material, and there was a lot of reading. And I think what we realized in the second act of that is there also has to be a way for people to access that information that's easier, right? They can't always go through a murder mystery to get answers about ABM. And so we called it the ABM second act. ABM comes back, and those ones are a lot more straightforward, right? Like, we've already gotten the message and the narrative, and those following articles were just the information, but still playing off the same container.
Yeah. It's advertising is expensive. There's just no two ways about it right now. And so to this point, like I said, I was getting back channeled from people saying, hey, a marketer on my team just sent this out to our entire team, right? About the Who Killed ABM campaign, right? That is where, okay, spend a little on LinkedIn and get a lot. There's all that stuff, to your point, Chris, that's happening on in the background that you don't even know. Or we did a campaign earlier this year, and there was the CMO chat room that they posted one of our ads and said, this is the first time I've actually seen AI creative work, right? And once again, that went to, I think there's like over 800 CMOs in that audience, right? Great, right? Whether or not anybody actually read our materials, I don't know, but that ad had the Inverta logo on it, so I'm here for it, right? So if it's really good, your ad dollars are going to get multiplied on the back end. And to a whole nother conversation, which we're not going to get into today, around attribution. There's no attribution for that. Like, it has to come in anecdotally, and you have to know that it's working in the back. But if you just put out a white paper, that's not happening. But when you take risks and you do some creative things, that's when you'll start to see some of that happening in the background.
Yeah. So here's another question: let's say, Jessica, you talked about the 20 people show up to a call. So now you're in this scenario, like, what do you do? Like, how do you navigate back to a strong, defined, creative process? And Jessica, I'd love to hear your take. Mine is typically that people are involving people internally because they think the goal is consensus. And to me, that builds really boring, uninteresting content
Mhm.
because all the edges get sanded off it. And whatever was initially exciting to the writer in the small team turns into the minimally effective, maximally agreeable version of that. And that's why you get all these B2B websites where the H1 on the website says, like, we are the intelligent document management solution for, anybody. It's
Yeah.
like, I can see why everyone approved that. And it doesn't work. And your website has now become the last place anyone would do research on your product. And so one way that, I like to try to shake that up is just Spark test. Just go show it to actual buyers. So we were in an engagement recently with a Fortune 100 company where we had like 36 people who all had an opinion about what the buyer thought, and no one had talked to a buyer recently. And so we used userinterviews.com to just find a couple of executives who were in the HR space to interview them and show them the web page anonymously, right? Those people don't know what they're being interviewed for. We ask them, like, hey, what do you think of this? And so instead of the committee writing fan fiction about what they think customers think, you get to bring back a little video that's like 2.5 minutes long. And it's like, hey, here's real people trying to navigate the current website. And they have no idea what these terms actually mean.
Yep.
And it's just like, yeah, that tends to shake things up. It's not always welcome, but it's really difficult to argue with. So Jessica, I'd be curious for you, like, how do you guide
No,
campaigns?
same
Yeah.
thing. If it's a little out there, I have a trust. I mean, I've been in marketing now for almost 30 years. I've got a network of people that are trusted, folks of mine that I will take stuff like this to and go, is this too much? Is it interesting enough? Like, does this make sense? Like Chris and I just had kind of this back and forth. He had put together an ad and I was like, what does that word mean? And he's like, well, that's a sports term. And I was like, is it? I, I've never heard
Yeah.
it. I've been an athlete my whole life, right? Now it may be, in like basketball sports terms, and I play a lot of other, sports or whatever. I don't know, but like, I think those kinds of conversations and having those conversations with trusted peers, right?
Yeah.
And people who are your audience. I mean, I have the discrete advantage of being a marketer marketing to marketers. So everybody in my network is my target audience. So that's really easy for me. But to Chris's point, finding people who are your audience and getting their unfiltered kind of reaction, and then taking that to that committee of 30 who wants to have this consensus and say, look, our target audience reacts positively to this. Like, that should be reason enough to take this chance.
Yeah. And all these marketing things come back on themselves because advertisers in the 70s and 80s would be laughing at us right now. They're like, it's called a focus group. This is all we do. Right? We do this all the time. So, but something about the digital age, I think we really got away from the sociological approach of just talking to a lot of people and being able to emulate their thinking and bringing that research consistently in. Like, I honestly think easier before the internet, when you had no choice but to go be running these focus groups and to be in contact and to do ride-alongs and to go visit the buyers at their house to see, like, oh wow, that's how you open the cereal. That is the bottom of the box. That makes no sense. Like, but we have to adapt and like take that in. So it's hard today, right? The veneer of Google Analytics and Marketo and HubSpot and all these trackers, they give you the simulation of understanding what the buyer is doing and thinking. And I think we really don't know. At least that's my feeling. I really don't know until we put it out there and ask them and they react. And we're like, wow, that's a surprising and unexpected reaction. And so back to Taylor's question of like, how do you then, like, you figured out a creative campaign that gets some traction. How do you get that to have more traction? It's like, it's those reactions from the first one. What did people say? How did they react? Like, I think your second act is in the reaction to the first one. What worked? And then do more of that, right? Is there a new meme campaign that builds upon that first one? because also buyers are fickle and do not have a lot of attention. And as much as we talk about brand affinity, I love the Marketunist comments about that as someone going through the supermarket aisle and saying like, oh, I can't find the brand that I have affinity for. It's just not how people think, right? They're trying to solve problems and do their job. And you got to hit them with more than one of these creative campaigns so that it actually sinks in that you are a company that does those sort of things. One other thing I'll share too is that we've got a toolkit, and I'll share this in the chat. But if I share my screen here, can you see this, Jessica? Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay. This is a toolkit of like, how do you get approval from reviewers? I've been doing this for more than 10 years now. And I actually draw a lot of inspiration from the sales training that I had. One of those things, let's say the committee cannot seem to decide on things, and you as the marketer or the creative are struggling because the reviews are going on and on and on. I would encourage you to build a rubric about what you're trying to achieve here. Like, what is the outcome that everyone wants? Because I bet if you're not getting consensus on that, everyone has different ideas. And so this is an example that we use fairly often where we bring that group onto a Zoom and create sliders. And this reduces a factor into just 2 dimensions, and they have to decide. In this case, it's agreeing on the brand tone and voice. Are we informal or are we formal? Like, where do we exist on that? And then you have everybody vote. And in this case, people were very much aligned, which is great. So now we have a rubric by which to judge whether the creative output actually fit that. And you can do this in all sorts of different ways, including like asking everyone, what are we trying to achieve here? Like, what do we want this campaign to do? And most people say like, well, we want, a variety of different outcomes. Which one is it? Like, is this awareness or is this lead generation? Like, which one are we really trying to achieve so that when someone pitches us creative ideas, we have a rubric to judge it by? We want this to be an awareness campaign and to get as much traction as possible. Okay, the form is counter to that. Maybe we shouldn't have a form. Maybe we shouldn't gate this asset because we want it to travel irrespective of us.
Yeah. Christian has a new question or comment around playing it safe versus not playing it safe. And I think for everybody else's benefit, it's if we wanted to kick off a B2B Instagram that reaches SMBs with something other than directly speaking to our ICP, we may be too dialed in on a strict voice sometimes. Now, this one's interesting, and this one to me has a pretty simple answer in that it's Instagram and you're trying to talk B2B on Instagram. If you put your LinkedIn ads on Instagram, it's going to fail because it's Instagram. It's entertainment. So you need to match the medium there. Like, you can't just pimp a white paper on Instagram. No, like, nobody is going to watch that. Nobody is going to engage with that. Nobody, I mean, that's just my opinion on that. But Chris, I don't know what you think.
Well, no, I think you could do the white paper only if you were making fun of the white paper. Like, if it's meta, right? If it's you trying to make B2B work on Instagram, right? There's like a fair amount of pretty funny creators on LinkedIn now who do that, who make fun of it. They're like, if B2B marketing wrote standard copy for things, and it's like all the ads make absolutely no sense. Everything is a solution and everything is streamlined and super powered.
Right. So so I mean, it's a little bit of matching the medium. I think there's always this fear that you're going to lose your genuine authenticity. And that is obviously a real concern. You still need to be true to your organization, but you also have to level up to whatever medium it is that you're reaching out to. And, to your point, you're starting out with 0 followers. So the risk is relatively low at this point. So play around with some things, see what works, and then kind of dial in what that tone of voice that's going to work for you guys on Instagram is going to be.
Yeah. And I'd ask too, it's always about too, like, what's the goal? What do you want to happen? Because if you do go down a comedic route, right? Like, we run into this all the time in B2B. People want a viral article or LinkedIn post. And viral is usually not very effective at generating engagement. And people with huge followings on LinkedIn who post inspirational quotes can't really sell stuff because they have a huge following of very loosely affiliated people who don't have a deep affinity for that person, their audience. So it also, yeah, what's the goal of the Instagram one? Like, I
Mhm.
do believe that a lot of business owners are going to be on Instagram. I'd be very curious, like what situation they're on Instagram in. I bet they're looking at other businesses and other business owners who are doing their little day in the life of morning routine type things and thinking they should do it, and they have no time to do it. Or, like all the advice that you get on there. So, yeah, I don't know. What do you want the brand to be? What do you want it to achieve? Is a great starting point to then experiment with different ways of achieving that. And, you know, helping executives understand that the goal is not to go viral. Probably
Yeah,
the goal is, right?
followers should not be your end game. They might be an indicator of what you're doing is working and it's reaching an audience, but just more followers, to your point, Chris, they might be interested because they are interested in a CEO's day in the life, but not anything to do with your actual company and what you're trying to sell. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. A mutual friend of ours, Christine, says that her tagline on social media should be boring but relevant. And I think that's a great way to think about it. I was like, your audience and the things that are interesting, and it doesn't pop off. But I notice this even with like I do not think that I have much of a following on LinkedIn, but I often get people saying, I saw your post on LinkedIn, and I go back and I check because I'm curious, and they never engage with anything. So it's like, also, like, if you're in the right circles and people are sharing things, they're like not even liking and engaging, really, honestly, but they are noticing. And that's maybe one of the greatest challenges of all of this, right? The executive asks, what's the return on this creative campaign? I don't know. Like, it depends, but it's back to our goal. But it's really hard to figure out how exactly it worked. But you do know it's working by people's affinity with the brand. One of our writers used to ask the question, what software do you have a crush on? And a lot of marketers and salespeople can answer that. They're like, oh, it's this, it's Vercel, it's Chili Piper. And every single one of those are companies that invested in doing creative campaigns, who really thought about the identity and who they wanted to be known for. And that affects a lot of things. Like, if we take this back to B2B, the B2B sale is a marketing sale now. Like, so much of that journey is led by marketing. People come in with a list already formed and preferences. I'd love to hear from you. Like, what role can creative campaigns play in helping you be on that short list?
Oh, are you asking me?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, first and foremost, the creative campaigns stand out, right? So if you're like I said during our pre-recorded session, right? There was Latitude Communications and there was WebEx. In fact, our product was more feature rich, but WebEx got noticed. Like, plain and simple. And so people were like, "Oh, well, that must," developed an affinity for the brand. They liked the ads. It stuck out. It was memorable. And so when people needed a web conferencing solution, the first one they looked up was WebEx. Right now, they may have eventually gotten to Latitude when they were doing their research, maybe, right? But WebEx was top of their list simply because they stood out. And so, I think, there's a lot of people pontificating about a lot of things on LinkedIn and everything else, and everybody's an expert and everybody knows everything, right? So I think the average consumer is just kind of like, yeah, 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 but like, who should I talk to? And so that's why standing out is so important, right? Because if kind of like everybody's knowledge is or their product is kind of table stakes, standing out and making sure you're making that short list is really important. Um, Otherwise, you might just get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. Which is a great note to close it out on, right? Is like, blending in is a huge risk right now, right? Like, I'll draw the distinction between marketing content and content marketing. Content marketing, in the sense that Robert Rose and the Content Marketing Institute defined it, which is creating media. It's creating stuff irrespective of the company that is helpful and educational, that wins people's affinity without you having to sell anything. And a lot of companies get into just doing marketing content because that's what can get approved and it feels like they need it for campaigns. And you're doing all of the work and all of the same effort as those doing creative campaigns. And it's just not breaking through people's liminal awareness barrier because it's just white papers on Instagram. So I'd say that blending in is a real risk. And I would encourage everyone to, when you are in that situation with the team planning and you feel the committee closing in, it's not safety first and it's not about consensus. It is safety third. And I love this quote by Thomas Aquinas: if the true aim of the captain were to preserve his ship, he would keep it in port forever. If the goal of marketing was to not be seen, like, we'd keep doing what we're doing. But your goal is to venture out and do something interesting. Have fun doing it yourself. And I think as a result, your buyers are going to enjoy it too.
Awesome.
With that, thank you everyone for joining. We will send the recording afterwards, as well as the deck and some links to the stuff that we shared. And I really appreciate all of you showing up.
Thanks so much.
Bye now.